Well, it happens all the time, but acoustic guitar players get turned off, some by the sound person and a lot of the times by their own team. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, this is Steve and Reed from Music and Ministry, and we are back again in our deep dive into talking about why people get turned off on the worship team. You know, you go into a service and there they are up on stage, but you cannot hear what it is that you see. Oftentimes those people are completely unaware that they are not being able to be heard in the general congregation. And so we're trying to help people get that figured out and get it fixed. And so today we are talking about the acoustic guitar. And so we've been going through this series, and I've talked a lot about it kind of systematically, but then we've been going back and talking about each individual instrument. And today the acoustic guitar is up on the docket. And so when we talk about the acoustic guitar, there's quite a few reasons why they get turned off or end up getting buried on their own worship team. And so we're going to run through some of those things today. The first thing we need to understand is how guitar players get the information that they need in order to play the song. And a lot of times that will come from a recording. You hear the recording, or you will get some sort of chord chart. And then you, as the acoustic guitar player, will read the chord chart and then try to play the song. Now, the number one mistake that most acoustic guitar players make is that when we go to adapt our songs from the recording to what it is that I'm going to play on whatever service day it is that you do on the acoustic guitar, we often go too far. And that's because the acoustic guitar, much like the piano, is one of the few instruments that you can actually play the whole thing just by itself. You could lead worship with just an acoustic guitar. In many churches, that's how it's done. The same way that you could lead an entire service on just the piano. Now, you could theoretically lead an entire worship service on the bass or on the drums, but it wouldn't necessarily be well attended or maybe sound that good. So then they make the mistake of going too far and then adapting the song as if they were the only one playing. So when they start learning the song, they'll be doing all of the rhythm. They'll be playing the chords. They'll also potentially be playing some melody lines. So they'll be playing. So they'll be doing. Now it sounds good when you play it by yourself, and so it becomes very self-reinforcing, self-affirming. But that's actually the wrong part, because you're now practicing as if no one else is going to be there, and when you do have people there, then those parts don't work out together. Now the next problem is that most people, when they hook up to the sound system, are going to be playing with some sort of in-ear monitor, and then most musicians are going to make their in-ears sound good based on what they practiced by themselves instead of listening to what it actually sounds like and then changing their playing to fit into the group. And so you basically miss the opportunity to make corrections by having a bad in-ear mix. And so we've talked again, a lot of that is what we would call bad systems, meaning that you're setting yourself up to make mistakes and then reaffirming those mistakes because you're living in your own alternate reality. So from the beginning, I will say as just a blanket statement is that you need to make sure that you're learning the song based on other people playing with you, and then you need to make sure that you put yourself in a listening environment where you can hear what those other people are doing and that you have some sort of connection, a tether to what's actually coming out the main speakers. All right, so when it comes to figuring out, okay, how am I gonna play the part that is actually either on the recording or is going to work in a live setting, you will need probably some help. And so that really just depends on what everybody else is doing, how many people you have on your team. Are you a church that is led from the acoustic guitar and then other people are kind of playing with you? Or are you part of a team where you're just one of the components and you typically have like a piano-led service, or it's electric guitar and drums-led service? All of that requires the music to be adapted in different ways. And so that's where the role of the music director comes in. And most people have, if they do have what's called an MD on the worship team, they're not necessarily choosing, hey, you play this and you play that. They are simply saying, here comes the chorus, okay, let's go up, and they might be talking to you in your in-ears as the service goes on. But we really need somebody to then step in and start arranging or reorchestrating or rearranging the song for your church, your people, and certainly then for the live environment where we don't have the luxury of having all of the things that are fixed in post, meaning that we're time aligning things, and then certainly our stereo recorded environment into whatever kind of environment that you have for your live, which will most likely be mono or limited stereo, just because it creates the best experience for the people that are in the congregation. So that is a lot to think about, but it's definitely important. Otherwise, you're going to end up playing the wrong thing or just playing what sounds good by yourself, and then it won't work because it'll be covered by other things and will potentially be in competition with some other things. So that all being said, if you're playing acoustic lead and somebody else is playing with you, then yes, you'll need to adapt it more towards what you would play as if you were by yourself, but you also then have to recognize the parts that you're going to shed to other people. And that's where we run into those problems. So because the acoustic guitar is such a fragile instrument in the sense of the sound, if you're playing notes that somebody else is playing, the chances are high that that other instrument is going to win out, or that you won't be able to be heard very well. And so when you're looking for, okay, the chord chart says G, and you're going to go right here to the standard G that everybody plays, but if everybody else is playing those exact same notes, which is highly probable because this is the standard place that piano players start their chords, and then their top right pinky would be playing this string. You and the piano player could potentially be playing the exact same notes, and then if you have an electric guitar player and they're playing this chord formation of G, then they're playing all the exact same notes that you're playing, even though it's a slightly different chord formation, they are all the same notes. And so if you have those multiple instruments playing the same notes, then the acoustic guitar is almost always going to lose. And so one of the biggest things is you have to figure out who is going to take what section of the sonic spectrum. And so sometimes the acoustic guitar player will play the low notes, and so if that's you, then you would generally only play 3 strings. And so instead of playing all 6 strings, because you're going to be taking up a wide swath of that space, you would only play the bottom 3. Now you can keep the same chord formation in your left hand and then just play the bottom 3 strings, or the lowest 3 strings that are actually on the top. It gets really confusing. And so what that does is it creates space for the vocalist, certainly, and then it also creates space for the piano player to then play with maybe just their right hand, and they would be playing these 3 notes. And then you're splitting up that space, that sonic spectrum. So instead of you taking the whole thing or the piano player trying to take the whole thing, you're just going to divide up a section, and then the other person takes this other section, and it kind of makes room for everybody, like fitting people into a larger picture. Now again, on the recording, you may go and watch some sort of tutorial, which those are pretty readily available online. Perhaps it's by a particular church and they will have maybe an acoustic guitar playthrough video, or you will go to some service like worshipartistry.com, which again, they don't give me any money for telling you or recommending you there, but they do a really good job of saying, hey, this is what was played on the recording, and they give it to you in multiple formats and even written music if you know how to read that, and they will show you exactly what they did on the recording. Those will still have problems because of all of the things that we need to adapt again to our live environments. So you have to simplify what it is that they're doing and not just adapt it to be, I'm playing, this is what I would play if I was the only one playing. So there's a lot to be done in there, and you have to just kind of understand those principles, otherwise you're going to end up trying to duplicate this sonic area that you're not very strong enough to overcome, because you're not going to win out over a piano, you're not going to win out over an electric guitar unless the sound person really likes you or is married to you, or maybe you're the pastor of the church and you just kind of decide that's how it's going to go, which all of those are legitimate circumstances and it happens all the time. But you're really looking for, as an acoustic guitar player, you're looking for the space that is not being occupied. And that being said, sometimes you have to tell the other people on your team, hey, you need to make some space for me because they're taking the whole room, and they're basically being sound hogs at that, or note hogs, if you want to call it that. And so sometimes, even in our own worship team with my family, I have to look over and be like, hey, you're playing my notes. Give me something, all right? And there are some times where it is good to split that out, and sometimes it's good for, hey, let's just let the verse live on the piano for a little while, and then maybe I'll come in the chorus. Or maybe I'll take the verse, and then they'll come in on the chorus. But again, all of those things are adaptations, things that you have to then understand that that's what's happening, and then figure out a communication system to make it happen. Because if you just play the same notes that everybody else is playing, you're going to get buried, you're not going to win. So when I'm listening, I want to make sure that I can hear those instruments, so I'm going to adjust my inner mix so that way I can tell what they're doing rather than just making my sound good to me. because I need to then be adaptive in where I'm going to play. And so if the piano player's taken the majority of my notes, then I'm going to just play my high strings. And if that's the case, then I may even play different versions of the chords that will then come up even higher into these upper register areas of the acoustic guitar, again, because I'm looking for space that isn't being taken by some other instrument. So I can't overstate enough how big of an idea that is playing fewer notes and then finding where those notes are. And that will help you stay in the mix quite a bit. The other part then is going to be the duplicated rhythm, and that is another major component and part of the reason why we can have the acoustic guitar player play and lead worship by themselves. It's because they can play the chords, they can play the melody if they know how to do that, and then definitely there's quite a bit of rhythm being given. But probably the number one reason why an acoustic guitar player will get turned down versus what I just talked about, which is why they'll get buried by the other members of their team. The reason why they'll get turned down is because their rhythm is not matching up with the other people that are playing rhythm on the team. Now, most of the time that's going to happen with the drums. And you would think, okay, well, no, I'm playing the rhythm, they're playing the rhythm, we're playing the rhythm together. Most of the time, that's not going to be 100% accurate. You'll have moments of where you're together, little moments where you're not together, and again, you would say, well, that's what they're playing on the recording, but they go back and they readjust all of those through a process called quantization to make it perfect. We don't have that in our live setting, and so we have to figure out either practice to where we can play the rhythm exactly together, which is very difficult, or we have to make sure that we divide up the rhythm and that we're not trying to duplicate the rhythm, because that will cause our ears to recognize, hey, something's wonky right there, and who's going to get turned down? It's going to be the acoustic guitar, possibly attempt to turn down the drummer as well, but then if we're still playing the same rhythm, it's going to keep causing problems. So we have to figure out on the acoustic guitar how to not play what I would call the rhythm, meaning the part that you think about whenever it is that you think about that song. So we will then play what then I call complementary rhythm. So that means that instead of playing, which would be what the drummer would be playing, we're going to play something like all downs. So we go. Now that, as a rhythm, goes with any other rhythm that you could play on the drums. And so that's what we're looking for, complementary, something that works with what the other thing is doing. Now there will also be moments where maybe the drummer will take the complementary rhythm and we will have the rhythm. We want to just make sure that we're not playing the same rhythm. And so for all of you who are not guitar players, or possibly if you're the sound person, you will visually be able to see if they are playing the same rhythms, because there are arms, and the other person's arms, the drummer, and possibly the keyboard player, they'll all be moving in synchrony. And you'll be able to just, again, see it and be like, oh, that's why it's so muddy right now. So we want to make sure that we're finding these different ways to play complementary rhythms. So I just played kind of a muted thing on my low strings, that would be all downs. All right, I can also play open, which we would call diamonds if you're here in Nashville, just whole notes. Now that sounds really empty when I'm just playing it by myself, but if we have behind it on a drum set, well, now they're working together, all right? And so there's lots of different kinds of complementary rhythms. You can also go down, 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 down. This, because it's all what I would refer to as straight, just meaning it's all keeping it very even. Anytime that you get on the offbeat or you get an upbeat, that's where you're kind of moving over from complementary rhythm into rhythm. And we just want to make sure that those are divided between different people. And then even that between different instruments. And so if you had the bass player that was going, you would not want to then play that one as well. You would then switch to something open, or you would do double time of that. So and just straight down, up, 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 down, up. And again, you're trying to stay locked into the tempo, either through a metronome or whatever it is that the drummer or whoever has the rhythm at the moment is playing, because as soon as you get off rhythmically, you're going to get buried. And I can tell you that I have ran sound for quite a few people, and this is a problem, and I try to talk to them and say, hey, we're having some rhythm conflicts. Can I get you to play something different on the acoustic guitar? And most people say, well, that's all I know how to do. So, and basically that means they're just going to get turned down, because if you have rhythm problems, you can't fix that at the soundboard. The only thing that you can do is turn them off. And so we don't want that to be you. So you'll think, again, if you have it in your in-ears where you're the main thing, that the drummer's playing with you, that maybe they're off, or that what you're doing is important, just recognize that you do not have to provide a whole lot of rhythm in order to be a part of the team. And again, sometimes it'll come to you, sometimes it'll go to other people. That's what makes music interesting. All right, well, that was a lot already, but there is quite a bit more. I mentioned it in a previous video, but it's worth repeating here. A major reason why acoustic guitar players get turned out is because they're playing inconsistently, or they are following the overall dynamics of the song as if they were playing by themselves. And again, we're in a group, and so what is not commonly known is that the acoustic guitar generally follows the inverse of the overall dynamics of a song, because again, acoustic guitar is a very fragile instrument, and so when it gets loud, we don't need the acoustic guitar player to get loud, because it's going to get buried by the other people that are in the group. And when it's time to be quiet, when the acoustic guitar player follows the quiet, then they're too quiet, and then they maybe get turned up, but then when it comes to the chorus, they're then playing too loud, and then they get turned down. And then, as we've talked about how sound people are, they generally play whack-a-mole with your sound, meaning that if you stand out, they're going to turn you down, and they're going to leave you down until they decide that they need you or want you and may forget about you. So you want to make sure that you don't upset them early, because otherwise it could be a long service. Let's just say that. So we need to follow the inverse of the overall dynamics of the song. So when it's quiet and it's acoustic guitar time, you need to be playing louder. So say the overall dynamics of the song is a 4, you probably, as the acoustic guitar player, need to be playing at a 7 or possibly at an 8 as far as your intensity. Now, again, that will feel weird because you're like, oh, I'm playing really loud right now. But if everybody else is playing at a 3 or a 4, then your 6 and 8 with their 3 will combine, and then you'll end up having that 4 or 5 overall dynamics, but you'll be in the mix. So then this is the hard part coming up, the next part, which is then when the song gets louder, you need to play quieter. And I will say that again because it's shocking. When the song gets louder, you get to that chorus and it's rocking, you as an acoustic guitar player need to play quieter. If you try to go to that 10 that the song is going and you try to get there on your acoustic guitar, first thing that's going to happen is that it's not going to sound good anymore, because the acoustic guitar does not sound super great when you play it really loud. And then it's just going to be too loud. And so you have all these other instruments that are making it big. You need to let them make it big, and you need to basically drop out. Because if you go loud, again, you're going to step on that trigger of the sound person, and you're going to get them to, oh man, the acoustic guitar needs to come down. And then they're going to bring you down, and then it's going to come to the next part of the song. You're going to then try to play quieter. You're going to be too quiet, and then they're going to boost you back up and down, and then they're finally going to get tired of it, and they're just going to leave you down. So when it gets loud, you get quiet. When it's supposed to be quiet, you get louder. That will help you significantly stay in the mix, because if you take yourself down, then they don't have to reach over and pull you down. That means that it's still there. You still have the power to come back. Now, if you're doing that and you're frustrating your sound person, you could just ask them, again, establish that tether to your sound person, that reality that is, and say, hey, does that sound good? Do I need to come down further on the chorus? Do I need to come up further in that verse? And they may tell you, well, I'll just take care of it. But you have to keep communicating back and forth, because by them saying that, they may be like, well, I'm just going to turn you off, so don't worry about it. All right, the last one that I mentioned before in a previous video, but I think it's worth mentioning again, is playing consistent between the different parts. And so sometimes you'll get in, and I often play a lot of finger style, where I'll be playing something like that, and then you'll go to the chorus, and then you want to go. And so what just happened is that I went from playing something fairly empty or quiet and then all of a sudden, because I'm going, again, trying to have the volume changes, the overall dynamic increase in that, I then am going to get turned down because I'm doing too much. And there's quite a bit that happens in our recordings where we're using compression and other different tactics to keep the volume about exactly the same. And so one thing that we have to do, because we don't always have that compression working for us, although most digital soundboards have that level of compression that you can do, most sound people don't know that much about compression, which is kind of how it is, because I went easily decades without knowing much about it, and leading worship and running sound for big events and things like that. So we kind of have to figure out, as a musician, do I have those tools holding me back? Because if I do have them and they're in place, well, then I can play as inconsistently as I just did and it'll all work out. But if I don't have them, then I, as the musician, have to adjust my playing and basically play like it's being compressed or that it's being adjusted. So I'm basically auto-adjusting. So I will then, with my finger style, play louder, and then when I go to my strumming, I'm going to bring my strum back down to where it's matching the same intensity of what it is that I'm doing, so I'm not creating these sudden spikes that then the sound person has to either watch me or will get tired of me and eventually will just leave me down. So that takes some time. If you need to, you can put a little decibel meter on your phone in front of you and play at one volume, and then try to then change the style of what you're playing and keep it at the same volume. And again, just take some time, some effort, some intentionality to be able to do that. But if you do it, you'll stay more in the mix. And again, you can then talk with your sound person and be like, hey, do you need more there? Do you need less there? And then you can, as the musician, do those adjustments and stay in the game. That would be great. All right, well, I know that, as I say every week, that's a lot to take in. But if you want to stay in the mix as an acoustic guitar player, you have your work cut out for you, because it is not easy. And so we definitely need to get better at figuring out what it is that we're supposed to be playing, so that way we can find the right space and adapt everything to whoever it is that we're playing, however we're deciding we want the sound to go. And so you need to look for those ranges. You also need to make sure that you're leaving space for other instruments, so that way you're not competing and annoying those frequencies and then getting turned down overall. But we also need to then decide who's going to have the rhythm and find those alternate ways to provide that complementary rhythm. Super important. Will help you dramatically to stay in the mix. And then we definitely need to follow that inverse pattern, so that way we're louder when it's overall quieter. Pick our moments, we have our moments, we're kind of there, and then when it gets loud, we let the other people in the band do the heavy lifting, and we actually play quite a bit quieter, or potentially don't play at all, and allows them to have their moment. And then the last thing would be playing consistently, basically playing as if you're compressed, but if you have all those compressor things in on your sound system, again, a conversation with your sound person to know how to play, so that way we're playing more consistently and we can avoid those sudden jumps in volume that trigger that whack-a-mole response on our sound person. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments section, and tune in next week. We will be talking about some other instruments. We're getting close to wrapping up this series, I think, so hopefully it's been good and been changing the life of your church. And until next time, God bless.